Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Kelly Hobbs with Southern New Hampshire University's Chandler Center. Thank you for joining us today in what I hope is the first of many conversations we have about community. Our goal with this series is to meet with individuals that work in community to discuss their jobs, their work, and how their field has been affected by the corona pandemic. Before I introduce our first guest, I want to tell our listeners and viewers that this will be recorded. The recording will be placed on the Chandler Center's social media accounts. We also welcome any and all questions. Elizabeth Richards will be monitoring our chat room. So please raise your virtual hands or type in any questions that you might have during our conversation. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Chandler Center, we are the Civic Engagement Office on campus in Manchester, New Hampshire. Civic engagement certainly can take on many meanings to many people, but for us, when we think of civic engagement through the Chandler Center, our main goal is to have our students graduate and leave as active and engaged citizens in their community, however that is defined. So in order to do so, students need to learn about community and issues that are impacting community. Today's focus is on affordable housing. In almost all communities, this is an issue. So with that, I want to welcome Dan Hobbs from Chartwell Management in the Rockingham Village Apartments. Side note, Dan also happens to be my husband. This is a first for us. So. That being said, welcome, Dan. Can you tell us a little bit about Rockingham Village Apartments and Chartwell Management?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Thanks for thinking of me. Well, Chartwell Management is a property management company, property development company, and they have properties kind of all up and down the Eastern Seaboard. In New Hampshire, they have 3 different locations. Most of them are market properties, but the property I primarily work at, Rockingham Village Apartments in Seabrook, is an affordable housing site. In fact, it's a low-income housing tax credit property. Sounds confusing. It is a little bit, but in the most broadest of terms, we essentially enter into a contract with a state entity, though the kind of funding for this is a federal IRS program. But through New Hampshire Housing, we basically enter into a contract where we say we will rent our properties, our units at below market rates, and we will rent those properties to those of moderate income. And we use a set of guidelines the federal government provides that basically sets an income, actually a minimum and a maximum that a household can earn and still qualify to live here. So there's a few more hoops that people have to jump through when they apply here, but it's not that much more expensive. So to give you kind of an idea of what that looks like, a family of 1, their income could not exceed somewhere around $50,000. Family of 2, you're looking at maybe closer to 60 some odd thousand. There's a qualifying agent who works for the company that screens everybody who comes in. In a very general sense, affordable housing is there to kind of create a bit of a stepping stone for folks. Property, particularly in New Hampshire, is very hard to come by. The vacancy rate for apartments is below 1%. That's very low. It's hard to find housing in general. It's really hard to find affordable rental properties. So for programs like this one, low-income housing tax credit programs, really can provide a nice space for folks to have a nice place to live at a reasonable rate that doesn't kind of bankrupt them. We find a lot of folks, even those of great means, they're spending over 50% of their income towards their mortgage, towards their rent. Anything over 30% the federal government deems as unaffordable, quote unquote. So that was a long-winded answer. I hope you like that.
No, that's great. I think I often confuse affordable housing for low income housing, and I know that there certainly is some overlap there. I'm wondering if you could maybe further explain the difference between the sort of kind of housing that you provide versus what someone might typically think of when they think of low income housing.
Yeah, that's a good question. It comes up a lot, and there's a lot of confusion there. People tend to use the terms interchangeably, and they are quite different. So, when you think of low income housing, that would be that your income is so low that you really couldn't afford anything at market rate. So there are programs set aside, particularly for disabled folks, seniors, where you essentially have to pay 33% of your income towards rent, and then the rest will be subsidized by either a federal or state entity. Affordable housing is kind of a broad term, and there are many different programs that get tucked in there. What I'm most familiar with is the low-income housing tax credit. And again, it's a benefit to the company here in that they get a tax break if they build these properties, maintain these properties for 10 years. Affordable housing for the renter has nothing to, it's not taking a percentage of your income. It's simply offering you what the feds deem as affordable housing for the area. So there's market research done. The federal government does that. They set guidelines and they say, okay, you can only rent this affordable housing property in this location for this amount for a 1-bedroom, this amount for a 2-bedroom, and so on. So they're all there. They're all a benefit. Ours is just structured a little differently. I should also say that this doesn't preclude anybody from using, let's say, a Section 8 voucher to live here. All of that is permissible. Any vouchers, there are veterans vouchers for housing. All of those we accept here. Just know that the overall kind of cost of the apartment, the rental cost per month, is going to be at less than the market value of the area here. And in Seabrook, on the seacoast of New Hampshire, it's pretty substantial savings.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that. The seacoast area is certainly one of the more affluent areas in New Hampshire. Do you happen to know what the average housing costs are in Seabrook?
Well, if I don't have what I would call like a general figure, but we do kind of market research on a weekly basis here. So there's staff on site that reach out to all different properties all throughout the Hampton Falls area, Seabrook, Hampton, and some other surrounding towns. And we gauge where those rental costs are at, and it helps us kind of adjust internally here, kind of how we can market the property. But what's happening in the seacoast now is that there is property development. There are rental units going up, but many of them are high-end properties. There's very, very, very little affordable housing in the area at all.
Yeah, I can imagine. So tell us a little bit about your average renter or tenant.
Yeah, I'd say that might be one of the more common questions I get, particularly from like friends and family. They'll say, well, what is affordable housing and who are the folks renting there? These are in many terms kind of the working poor. These are people who are well employed. It's just very difficult to even be well employed in the area and still be able to rent something at a reasonable cost. Seabrook has the benefit of being right on the Mass border. So many of our residents do work in Massachusetts, and locally right here on the we're right off of 95, literally less than a quarter mile from 95. That gives a lot of advantages to our residents. They have a lot more opportunities for higher paying jobs, and there's quite a few warehouses, distribution centers, decent jobs that can turn into real careers. So it's a good location. Seabrook is it kind of has its two sides. There's a very towny side to Seabrook, very residential, and then there's more of the shopping district kind of area with the Walmarts and the McDonald's, strip malls, and things like that.
Thanks.
A nice meandering answer for you, Kelly.
No, it's good. So tell us a little bit about your role at within the company and within the housing development, and not just your role and what you do, but why are you there? Why has Chartwell found value in bringing a position such as yours to the organization?
Yeah, well, my position, resident service coordinator, is actually mandated. So having a low-income housing tax credit property, particularly one that is 100% affordable housing. Some properties you may find there will have a certain percentage of their property will be market value. The other may be affordable. Here we're 100% affordable housing. With that comes a mandate that they must have a resident service coordinator on staff. And that's me. So like many roles, I wear a lot of different hats, but in a sense, I am kind of an on-site resource for all the residents. I try to provide kind of a connection to the community at large here. Sometimes that means connecting folks with some of the community resources, like a community action program, Southern New Hampshire Services, we partner with quite a bit. The town, the schools, lots of things like after-school programs and things like that. We try to connect our residents with those services to kind of have them better integrated. And certainly our residents here, particularly now during a time like COVID, we've had many layoffs, many furloughs, reduction in hours, and folks are struggling. And for many folks, they've never had to access any kind of community resources in the past, and they don't know how to go about it, don't know how to even start. Many folks have never filed for unemployment, and the list goes on. So I am here as that resource to help connect them there. Sometimes that's through residents reaching out to me, other times it's the other way around. But I'm here to help in the most basic of senses. I try to also bring those services right into the community. Right now it's a bit difficult with, on lockdown and the spread of the virus, but in a typical day, I would be trying to bring in some community resources right here on site. I mean, that could be something very social, a barbecue. We've had coffee with a cop kinds of things come in where the residents can interact with the local police department. We do our Christmas parties. We do our, hey, here comes summer parties. But we also bring in the local SPCA, who's done veterinary clinics at little to no cost for folks here. They typically actually come out twice a year. We have a lot of pets on the property, and they can get regular checkups and vaccinations right here on site. We also partner again with lots of these after-school programs, and in some cases, they'll come deliver programming right here. We have kind of a field, a basketball court, swings, tetherball, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of room to kind of have the programming right here for some of the children on site. And other times we organize it so we can bring a group of our children out to, actually the recreation center is not far from here at all. So we can have kids either meet there after school and do programming, or again, kind of bring them here. So again, I'm kind of the connection to the community. I'm kind of bringing all those things together, providing resources. There are times where I'm dealing with maybe some conflict between residents on site. That comes up, I kind of act as a mediator. And sometimes I act as an in-between between the property management and residents, and also some of the vendors that might come out as well. I kind of act as an intermediary.
It sounds like you are trying to build community within the community, like community within the apartment development, but also sort of bring that community into the larger Seabrook community.
Yeah. Seabrook, based on its location, tends to have people come through, but not many people kind of stay here long term. And it's a bit of a jumping board to maybe better work in Massachusetts. But we want people to come, we want them to stay, and part of that is kind of being integrated into the community at large. One of the difficulties of my job here, know that previous to me taking this role for many years, I worked in senior services, and at times I worked in senior housing. And in those environments, the residents, the property management are all very used to having some form of resident service coordination on site. It may have a different title, but it may kind of serves the same purpose. So here in affordable housing, many people are not used to the role. They're not used to there being events on site. So some of my also know that the property here, the company Chartwell only purchased this a little over 2 years ago. So we're still in the process of kind of educating people as to who I am and what I do and what my role is, how people can participate. And that's a lot of what I'm trying to do now. A lot of those first conversations I have with folks over the phone or in person are often, we kind of start off with, oh, I didn't even know there was such a thing. What do you do? I'm happy to tell them, but there's a bit of a learning curve and an awareness of what I'm here for and what I can help with.
You touched on the impact that COVID-19 is having on your community there at Rockingham Village. I'm wondering if you could go into more detail about that, and particularly around the tenants that live there, unemployment, anything sort of to paint a picture to us about how this pandemic has affected that community.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on it a little bit before. I think the company has kind of seen some of the value, or at least what resident service coordination can bring to the table for the property in general, all the residents therein. COVID has really kind of shown that a bit. So when all of this was going to when COVID first hit in kind of early March and people were trying to figure things out, Southern New Hampshire University and Rockingham Village did have a partnership worked out where the Chandler Center was going to come out. We're going to have a series of events here. There was kind of a partnership with students and staff at SNU, as well as myself and the staff here and some residents. Everything kind of got blown up. So a lot of the activities I had planned all kind of went away. And then we started getting stay-at-home orders. People started to lose work. It usually started with hours reduction, and then we started to hear about job loss and furlough. So we needed to kind of ramp up efforts, and that's what we did. So I would say that we probably reached out to 85+% of the property here, usually by phone, just to check in and make sure everything was okay. We did have folks reach out to us, and once we made contact, find out that there might be an issue, that's where I can help step in. So unemployment under normal circumstances has quite a few restrictions as to who may be eligible for unemployment. And those doors kind of swung wide open with COVID, many more people being eligible. Unfortunately, many folks on our property that were affected did not realize, for instance, that if their hours were simply reduced, they were still eligible for unemployment. In a various other scenarios, some people were told by their companies, for instance, that, oh, you will not qualify for unemployment, so don't apply. The list goes on and on. But again, that's where I step in. I can kind of right the ship a bit and direct them to unemployment, how you apply, what to expect, timing, that kind of stuff. We also had some folks that ran into some issues, some people with some kind of complicated employment where they may have been without work, got work for 1 week, and then COVID hit and they were laid off, and they thought, well, I haven't been there long enough, I don't qualify. The further you kind of dig, you find there were more and more kind of unique scenarios, and people needed answers. So I did have to place calls to unemployment directly and ask, about these scenarios and what the proper procedure is. In New Hampshire, to be honest, they were very helpful and really kind of helped out quite a few of our residents. So that's the unemployment side, and we still try to help folks. Up until today, I took a few calls about folks who had lost work. the other side of that is kind of the other resources that are out there, things like electric assistance, fuel assistance, food stamps, SNAP, some of the local food banks, people losing health insurance because they've lost their jobs, and so on. So certainly with COVID, most of those resources, if not all of them, were overloaded. So most folks did try to reach out to the proper authorities, didn't get quick responses, and then their second calls were often to me. What do I do? Rent is coming up. Can't gain access to these resources. I've been approved for unemployment, but I haven't received any funds. So again, I'm there to kind of at least explain things to the best of my knowledge and give some people some reasonable expectations. The last thing I'll say we did internally here was we provided a program for all residents where we would allow them to pay only 70% of their rent and defer 30% of it to be paid off over like a 6-month period after COVID kind of subsides. So that we did run into some folks who were under the impression that during COVID, it was a quote unquote state of emergency and neither rent nor mortgages would be due. So unfortunately, that's not the case. And one of the harder conversations we have to have is that even though we may defer a certain amount of your rental requirements, that is still going to come due. So we did as much as we thought we could, assisted people directly here, but also tried to connect them with those community resources, all in an effort to try to, keep everybody's head above water. We have not evicted anybody. I mean, at this point, you can't. And we've been flexible with many, many folks on site. It's just, quite frankly, it's good business, but, this company has a heart as well, and I'm a part of that.
We have a question here.
All right.
That is related to COVID and the economic hardships that many people are facing. So I heard that if you're not approved for unemployment, you can then apply for the additional $600 stimulus. Do you know if this is true? And you may or may not be able to answer this, but do you know anything about this?
The question was, even if you're not on unemployment, can you get the $600 additional federal funds? Was that it?
Yes.
To my knowledge, no. To my knowledge, that $600 is directed through unemployment, and that's how you receive it.
Okay.
Can't say I've even heard of it being something different. We have encountered some folks on property who maybe did not file their taxes in the past year or two. If you haven't done that, the IRS doesn't know where to send it, and you may not get it, or you may not get it in a timely manner. We have run into a few folks like that. I've also heard from some folks who may be on supplemental security income, other forms of Social Security, who were expecting funds and didn't get them. I've actually spoken with folks who were expecting a paper check and didn't realize that they were actually automatically deposited $1,200. But I can't say that I've heard that you can actually ask for an additional $600 through unemployment. I'm no expert, though. You may want to look that one up on your own.
Okay. I really appreciate you sort of painting, for me, a clearer picture about what affordable housing is and how it can really impact communities, and how it can really provide families that are working class, lower to moderate income individuals with an opportunity to have quote unquote affordable housing. Could you tell us what it is you love about your job?
Yeah. Well, I'll take it back a little bit to kind of like high school and college. I was unfortunately not one of those kids who knew exactly what I wanted to do. I tried a bunch of different things. I had different jobs. I tried different courses. I had different majors. And to be frank, even when I graduated college, I really still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had a series of jobs. They were all kind of fine in their own way. And then I I kind of had an opportunity through a friend of a friend, and I began working at a nonprofit senior services agency out of Massachusetts. And almost from the first day or the first week, I finally realized, oh, this is what I want to do. And again, in the most basic of senses, I just want to help. And this is a really good way to help people. So that's always what gravitated me to kind of social services. And it's taken some twists and turns. There's been times where I've been involved in housing. There's been others where it's been home care. And even so I ran an employment program in the state for some time. So for me, it's always about kind of helping. That's a really basic answer, but that's it. I want to help.
I know this about you. And I know that you often come home with the many stories about how you are helping and how particularly your role has an impact within the community and how it has strengthened the relationship that tenants have with each other, with the company, and ways that they can engage in the community better.
Yeah.
Could you also tell us a challenge that you have with your job, or what do you perceive as the biggest challenge with your job?
The biggest challenge. In a general sense, I think it's about kind of communication, trust, things like that. Again, I kind of mentioned that many of the residents here, I should give you a sense of how big we are. There are almost 400 units and over 1,000 residents live here. It's actually the densest population of people in Seabrook. So again, I told you that not many people are kind of used to having a service coordinator kind of available to them. So a lot of what I'm doing is just a constant effort to get myself out there. Sometimes that's literally me walking the grounds, particularly when the kids are getting picked up from the bus to go to school, when they're getting dropped off. And then somewhere around the middle of the day, some residents who are home, that's when they walk their dog. So I'll walk the property, we flyer everything, we use Facebook. We kind of have a direct email service that we can use. It's always about kind of engaging them. Right now, they may not have any interest in any services or anything I do, but I need them to know that in 2 years, things may change or whatever. I want my name to kind of be stuck in their head and like, oh, let me give Dan a call. I want them to talk to their neighbor in the elevator and have them say, oh, I talked to Dan. He helped me with that like a month ago. It's really easy. That's what I hope kind of happens and kind of spreads here kind of locally. And then I hope it branches out even beyond the property here and kind of connects to Seabrook. You know, I want the community at large to turn around and look at Rockingham Village here and our residents and think, oh yeah, no, I could give Dan a call and see if he'd be interested in doing something like this. His residents might like that. That's what it's all about right now, is really building that base. Again, 2 years, in a sense, is a long time, but much of the first year here was kind of a physical rehab of the property where millions of dollars were pumped into windows, roofs, and flooring, kind of all throughout. So year 2 and beyond has become much more resident focused, and that's where I kind of popped in.
Okay, great. We have a few questions for you. Could you tell us what your major was in college, and does it connect to the work you do now?
My first major in college was speech pathology, and I still wonder to myself, where would I be if I stuck with that? At the time, I convinced myself that if I got this degree, I would pigeonhole myself and never be able to find any other work other than in speech pathology. So I decided to get a more broad degree. My degree was in communications at the University of Hampshire. Graduated 2002.
And do you feel that it connects to the work that you do now in any way?
Yes, a little embarrassingly, the years after I left college, I remember feeling like, what did I really learn? But then I started to work, and then I began to realize how beneficial that time in college was. Again, communications at UNH was very kind of theoretical, had a lot to do with interpersonal communication. And I also minored in psychology, and the blend of those things makes you just kind of very aware, reading body language and things like that. So I can see you smiling. But
You're very
yes,
good at that.
I've had, it's been very beneficial. It took me a few years to kind of admit to myself, okay, no, that really was really helpful. So yes.
And what advice would you give to a college student who wants to enter a helping field?
Honestly, I really wish I did more internships. I wish I took advantage of something like the Chandler Center. That kind of link between the education you're receiving and the service you're providing, the environment in which that's what I would say. That's what I wish I did more of was to those internships, volunteer wherever. I wish that the part-time jobs I got in the summer and sometimes schools, I wish that they were more in the field of the helping services. Yeah. I would have got more experience. I would have felt more confident at the beginning. I don't want a little taste of what was to come. Yeah.
Thank you. I have one more question for you. And you're clearly an advocate for low-income families or people that are struggling to make ends meet. And as an advocate for affordable housing, could you tell us what is something that we could do to help the cause?
Yeah. That this old saying of, politics is local, is a good place to start. All these things start with conversations. And I think a lot of those are just conversations you have with friends and family around the dinner table. It's about getting those things out there. As I said, when I tell people what I do and that I'm in affordable housing, 9 times out of 10, people either have no idea what that is or are misinformed about what that is. So it's important to have that conversation and have it get out there. The connotations surrounding things like affordable housing and kind of the quality of the tenants and the residents we may have. I really wish that the kind of veil was pulled back on that to show what affordable housing really is, who these tenants really are. They really are just like everybody else. The idea that these are, people on the bad side of the law, up to no good, is really just ridiculous. These are just like people like anybody else looking for an affordable place to live. Yeah. So having those conversations, you can take further steps beyond that. There are wonderful advocacy agencies for affordable housing in the state. New Hampshire Housing Matters is probably the biggest advocate for affordable housing. And actually in this past year, they've had tremendous success getting additional funds added to the Affordable Housing Fund in New Hampshire. A great agency. They do great work. Also, again, locally, issues come up within towns, cities, states about affordable housing. Essentially, how should a town or a city, state, how should they allocate funds? What percentage should go towards affordable housing? How important is housing? These things are talked about and debated. Again, locally, state level, and everybody can get involved in those things. You need not have a special badge or anything. Any individual can go in and voice their thoughts, their concerns. I think you'd be surprised how many people probably share your thoughts. Rich or poor, ask anybody. It's not affordable. It just isn't. Many people are spending far too much of a percentage of their income just to have a basic necessity. And if that's the basis of your income, it makes things like food and health insurance and a trip to the movies and a pizza that much harder. Lots of things start with a good place to live. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dan. We really appreciate the time that you spent with us. And though I live with you and see you every day, I did not know half of this. It's really great to see the side of you that I don't see at home. And I appreciate all that you shared with everybody here. And thank you.
Thank you. Now, as I was speaking, I knew I screwed up the answers to the financial eligibility for affordable housing, and I have the form right here. Wait 1 second. I want to make sure I give you accurate information.
Okay. You need some artwork in that office.
Working on it. Aha, I found it. All right. So I got to give you the right answers here. So the maximum income you could have for, let's say, a family of one is just above 50,000. For a family of two, it's about 57,000, and a family of three is a little over 65,000. Those figures do change, though, at least once a year. So those are the accurate numbers. Didn't want to get my hand slapped. Sorry.
No, thank you. I think that people are always really interested in those nitty gritty details. Like what does an apartment cost if you're, looking for affordable housing? What are the minimum and maximum requirements? So thank you. And with that, I will wrap up the interview and send it out to our social media world. Thanks again.